Good morning. Welcome to our Philly Youth Vote candidate interviews with the Auditor General candidates. We have six candidates for the Democratic nomination for Auditor General and one Republican who we're going to interview tomorrow. And today we have, before I introduce our candidate, I wanted to say that we have the Vote That John party coming up on Saturday, where we're going to have youth from all over Philadelphia are going to get on to an online house party with a bunch of different DJs and musicians, including DJ Jazzy Jeff and a number of others, DJ Diamond Cuts, who you may know. And we're going to be registering people to vote and seeing if they have their mail-in ballots, whether they've applied for them and received them. We're going to get as many people to the polls on Saturday as possible. So please join us for that. Today we have Christina Hartman, a Democratic candidate for PA Auditor General. She's going to be interviewed by my students in my social science class at Central High School. So I'm going to jump over to the Google Meet here and stop presenting. And we should see Ms. Hartman coming up. I'm going to put you on so we can see you better. Good morning, Ms. Hartman. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited that you're doing a voter registration drive on Saturday. That's awesome. And can I just ask, is that the DJ Jazzy Jeff? Because that will exactly pin my age for everybody in the
Yes, group. It is the DJ Jazzy Jeff.
That's so exciting. Yeah. And I saw that you're working with When We All Vote, because I know they did an event on Instagram with DJ D Nice and Michelle Obama last week or 2 weeks ago. A little bit,
so it's a similar kind of it's a local version of that. Yes.
That's awesome. Well, I follow those things closely, so that's exciting.
That's great. Well, thank you again for joining us. I'm going to turn this over to the students now. They have a bunch of questions for you, starting off with Nicole.
Okay, so good morning. My name is Nicole, and I want to start off by asking you if you could tell us a little of your background, education, and experience.
Of course. Well, thank you, Nicole, so much for that question. As introduced, I'm Christina Hartman, running for Auditor General, and I grew up in Lancaster County. Although when I'm talking to Philadelphia audiences, I always like to tell folks that my mom and dad are from Philadelphia, so I spent a lot of summers with my grandparents in the northeast of Philadelphia. So, but anyway, I spent my childhood here in Lancaster and spent most of my 20-year career working with folks all over the world to do community organizing and elections work, just like you'll do on Saturday. And as part of that work, I was always responsible for federally funded programs. So that meant your taxpayer dollars and mine if you pay taxes, or your parents if you don't. And I was responsible for spending that money efficiently and effectively. And then the US government would come in and audit me and my organizations to make sure that I was doing that in accordance with the law. And I'm glad to say they always found that I was. So that's my technical auditing experience as it relates to this position. But more importantly, as I'm sure many of you know, this is really a leadership and management position. So our current Auditor General manages about $38 million with many offices around the state of Pennsylvania and a large staff. And I used to manage a $44 million program with many offices around the world and also a large staff. And as I think we can see during the COVID-19 crisis, having really good leadership and management in government is really important. In fact, our very lives could be at stake. So that's a little bit about my background and how it relates to this position, but you probably also know that some political experience is required for this job. So I have 2 degrees in politics and economics from the George Washington University and from Fordham University. And in addition to those degrees and my work around the world, I've also run for Congress in 2016. Now, you probably remember 2016 wasn't a great year for Democrats, but in spite of that, we actually worked really hard to win over folks from the other side, independents and some moderate Republicans, without giving up our democratic values. And we were successful in reducing the Republican margin in the old Lancaster, Chester, and Berks County seat by 5 points. And I think that's the kind of experience we're going to need this November. I think that's experience that's really important in making sure that we bring Pennsylvania together, but also that we're focused on the issues that matter most and we can get into those in a minute. But that's a little bit about my experience. I also should note, because of the group that I'm talking to, I spent a good deal of my career working on a youth leadership program in sub-Saharan Africa. And I also worked in the UK for a bit. My husband's British, so we spent about 1.5 years in London. And I worked for Prince Charles's main charity, helping young people to start their own businesses.
Okay, thank you. So you explained a little bit of this, but could you please describe the responsibilities and powers of the Auditor General and why are you running to be this position?
Sure. So, the Auditor General really most simply protects your tax dollars. So, anytime, so that obviously the state collects money in the form of taxes, and then it spends money in the form of its budget and programs that it initiates. And so, the Auditor General's job is to follow that money wherever it goes. So, for example, that could be the government itself spending that money. So, the Department of Environmental Protection could spend money, and I can audit that money. It could be a nonprofit. So, for example, a domestic violence shelter in Philadelphia may get a grant from the state government, and I can audit that. Or a corporation may be a vendor of the state government and may spend money, on state taxpayers' behalf, and I can audit that as well. So those are the basics of the job. I actually entered into this race. It kind of goes back a little bit. So I'll just take a moment to tell that story, because I was working in international work for most of my career. But in 2011, you might remember that the Jerry Sandusky child abuse scandal broke. And I was, just really horrified by that something that was that big and that horrible and affecting children could happen in our state in the year of 2011. And so that was the beginning of my journey to figure out how I might help my own country instead of helping all the other ones that I was helping. And so I started working on issues related to domestic violence, sexual assault, and child abuse. And I could see that the changes that I wanted to see weren't happening from the outside. So I was on the outside pushing, advocating to government and the White House on Capitol Hill and in Harrisburg. And I could see that those changes weren't being made. And so I decided that the best thing for me to do would be to get on the inside so that I could start making the changes that I wanted to see. And that's how I decided to run for Congress. And then, of course, I lost that race in 2016, as did many Democrats. And so I was trying to figure out what was next for me. And then, of course, last year, we knew this position would be open. Our current Auditor General is term limited. So I thought, well, maybe this is a good fit for my skills. I told you a little bit about why I think I'm a good fit. And so I went to some of my mentors, so Governor Rendell and Senator Casey and our current Auditor General, and I asked them, what did they think? Here's what I have to offer. Are these, do these match up with the job? And I should also mention that Senator Casey used to be our Auditor General, 2 times ago. And so, they all thought that I was a good fit for this job as well. And that's how I'm here. I would like to serve the people of Pennsylvania, and I think I have the skill set to do that.
Okay, what can you do to ensure that as a city and a state, we are ready for round 2 of COVID-19 or any other illness or disaster with similar closures like we are currently facing?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for this very important question. This is why making sure we have young people in conversations is so important, because no one's looking to the future more than all of you. And so I'm really grateful for that forward-looking perspective. For me, I think there's a lot of things that government can do to make sure that we're ready. But as Auditor General, specifically, I think what we need to do is look at what we did this time and audit where the money went. So there was a lot of money, and there is a lot of money being spent on COVID-19. Things that relate to it, let's say small business loans and grants, other, aspects of it, for example, nursing homes and things like that. There's a lot of money being distributed right now. So it will be my job, if I'm successful and once elected, to audit those books and to see how that money was spent. And in my mind, the question is, did we make the right choices? So we know that we can't be perfect. That's a hard thing to do, but what we can do is get better. And so I would look at, did we actually address the needs that were there at the time? And as we go into our next emergency situation, because you're 100% right, there will be another one. What can we do differently next time? And it will be my goal as Auditor General to, again, audit those things and then really shine a very bright light on what we need to change, like what we did well and should do again, and then the things that we didn't do so well that we need to fix for next time. And I would also add that my experience, I've worked in a lot of very difficult and challenging political environments around the world. So while I've never dealt with a pandemic because I'm not a health expert, I'm a democracy expert, I have been in places where there have been coups or where there have been al-Qaeda threats or where civil unrest is happening. And it's a very similar environment to a pandemic in that you have to respond to the crisis at hand. And you have to be really good about how you make decisions, and also that you have a team of people in government who are what I call the A team. So your best players, right? Sort of like when you play sports, you want your best people in, you want your varsity team in. And so making sure that we have those people in government, and I believe that my experience will help us to really lay out the plan for what's next.
Okay, so my name's Stella. PA taxpayers pay $18 million a year for the Keystone exams that high school students have to take. What is your stance on standardized tests? Do you feel like these tests provide a racial disadvantage or advantage? Do you believe that they are even necessary?
Stella, my mom's a teacher, and I gotta say, so I got an earful about, she teaches at a Catholic school and she's a first grade teacher, so she doesn't have to deal with these exams in particular. But I understand the purpose of them, and I understand what they were intended to do. However, I don't believe that they actually do what they were intended, which is to help us better understand the way in which students are learning or how much they're learning. I think what they do is whenever we have standards, so it's important to have standards, but whenever we make standards, what's the word I'm looking for, systematic, then oftentimes those standards can be something that we're working towards for the sake of those standards. So in this instance, folks might call it teaching to the test. So I think, again, we should probably think about going back to the drawing board here, re-examining these standards, and is this the best way? So this is probably the theme of my Auditor General or what I intend to do as Auditor General, but look at what we've done and see if that's working and providing the results that we want. And if it's not, and I think in this case it's not, then come up with something else that's better. And I think, again, we've got the smarts and creative minds of many people around the Commonwealth to do that. And I think that there are better uses at $18 million to help us make education more equitable in Pennsylvania and to give students the skills that they need to be successful in life, in the world, and in our 21st century economy.
Hello, I'm Kiera. So my question is, how important is student safety in the communities they go to school in? How would you go about making communities safer for students who walk or bike to school? For example, we had an incident not too long ago, like last year, where a student was just walking to our school and she got shot, like for instances like that.
Kara, thank you so much for that important question. This issue is very important to me because if we are not safe in our communities, then nothing else matters. It's really hard for students to go to school and to focus on the task at hand and on their schoolwork if they feel threatened on their walk to school. Or even if they feel threatened in the evening when they're at home trying to get their homework done and there are shots ringing out in their neighborhood. if we don't have safety and security in our environment, then it's very hard to do anything else. And we also know that when students have these things happen to them as students or adults, that they're traumatized, right? And then you're going to school in a traumatized way. And folks react to trauma differently. So for some folks, that's acting out and perhaps what you might call misbehaving, but really it's a reaction to something else that they're suffering from. And so I think so just to say that this issue is very important to me, and the way that we tackle this through the Auditor General's office, I have to say is somewhat limited in that it's hard to tackle through this office. But one of the things that the current Auditor General has done is looked at gun regulations and how they're currently being applied. And so that's something that I can continue to do and perhaps make it an annual or every 2-year report that we put out, because part of the role of my office is to do audits and to really shine a bright light on things that are going wrong, like this issue that we're talking about, and make sure that people are aware of it. So it's really raising awareness and using the audit process to raise that awareness. And then lastly, I would say it's also about working with elected officials, so those that are in Philadelphia and around the Commonwealth, to make sure that those legislators are making changes. So I can highlight all these issues as the Auditor General, but I can't make the change myself. So it's very important that I work together with other people and that I pressure them, right? So that I put pressure on them and say, we need to make this change. And I promise you that I'll do that.
Thank you.
Of course.
Hi. What will you do to provide more resources for students' mental health?
So this is another really important issue, and it relates back to the trauma piece, Celine. So obviously students are in greater need of mental health services. I actually would argue that all Americans and Pennsylvanians are in greater need of mental health resources. So once again, from the Auditor General perspective, what I can do is examine particularly Medicare and Medicaid programs that might provide mental health support and see how I would guess, I don't know this for sure, but I would guess how little money is being spent on that, and then highlight that issue and advocate that more money be spent on that in the legislative budget. So we know that students need that support in order to be successful in school. But also, getting back to the previous question, if we addressed other issues like safety and security in neighborhoods, or we addressed hunger, then we perhaps might need a little less mental health support. But regardless, you're right, it's needed. And what I can do is shine a bright light on what I think is how little is actually being spent on that by the government.
Okay. So what will you do to make sure Pennsylvania schools are fairly funded so Philly students can get an education equal to students living in wealthy suburbs?
Stella, this is the most important question of all, because since I graduated high school, as we discussed, Mr. Quinn and I went to the same high school, and I think he'd probably tell you what I would tell you, which is that I had the best public education and I would put it up against any private school any day of the week. I had amazing teachers and I wouldn't trade my public school education for anything. But you're right, my public school had money, and we have to change that. So the governor has put into place, or starting to put into place, what is called the fair funding formula to try to create equity between school districts, to make sure that they're funded at the same level. And so as Auditor General, what I want to do, and it will be a priority of mine, is to audit that funding to make sure that it was actually spent in the way that it was intended in order to level that playing field. And also to make sure that the school districts that weren't getting that money that they needed to are getting it now. So even right now, without the fair funding formula, what we know is that the state isn't always meeting its commitments to public school districts for education. So Philadelphia School District gets some of its money locally from local taxes, and some of it comes from the state, and some of it comes from the federal government. And the state isn't always sending all the money that it's supposed to. So I'd also like to make sure that we're auditing that and shining a bright light on it. And then again, working together with legislators to make sure that money is coming to the districts that need it most.
Okay, what is one fun fact about you?
Fun fact, Josiah, that's, depends how we define fun. So I guess a fun fact is, and I alluded to this with the DJ Jazzy Jeff thing at the beginning, and I'll tell this crowd of people, but I probably have never revealed this before. I really enjoy clubbing, and I don't know what you kids call it these days, but going to club and dancing is one of my favorite things ever. And I don't get to do it that much anymore, but it's definitely something that I really, really enjoy, which is why when we were talking about the club quarantine and things like that at the beginning, I was really excited when those things started happening, because it was a way for during quarantine to have a little fun with music in a positive way. And also I'm a really good cook and baker, and I also know how to sew, which makes me kind of like a 1950s housewife, except I can't stand being at home all the time. Those are my fun facts.
Okay. And finally, why do you think it is important for young people to vote?
So I have to confess to all of you that I wasn't the best voter for a long time, because I thought that my vote didn't matter and that it didn't make a difference. And I was just one person. And so why did it matter? And I thought that way for a really long time until my late 20s. I wouldn't say I didn't vote at all. I would just say I voted very infrequently. And so I would just say that it's important because one vote does make a difference. And now that I've been working in Pennsylvania elections for the past 5 years, I've seen so many elections come down to a single vote or maybe 10 votes. And it really does matter in terms of voting and showing up. But also it matters because these are the people who are making the decisions about your lives. And I'm sure you've heard the expression, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So the people who are the loudest are the ones who get the response for politicians. So if we have a lot of older folks who are retired, who are sitting at home calling their politicians all day, then the politicians are going to do what they want because that's who they hear from the most. And those are the loudest voices. And so I would just encourage all of you to be a loud voice and to encourage other young people to be a loud voice too, because the more we hear from you, the more we have to focus on your issues. I mean, someone like me will focus on them anyway because they're important to me too, because I'm 42 and I'm not that old. But just to say that one vote does make a difference. These are the people who are making decisions about your lives. And so be as loud as you can.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Yes, we really appreciate that. We appreciate you coming in and talking to Philadelphia public school students. They definitely do need to vote and get engaged, and we need politicians engaging with them as well. So this process has been really helpful in hearing from you all. Do you want to say last few words here?
Well, I would just also, with the voting piece, I would also just encourage all of you as you're getting more active in your community and in your neighborhoods that you also consider running for office, maybe in a couple years, but just that we need more young people. We need diversity of voices at the table of all kinds. So whether that's ethnicity or race or gender or it just doesn't matter. All of it is valuable, and your perspective is very important. So I'm just really grateful for your time today, and thank you so much.
Great, thank you too, and good luck in your campaign.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Good luck.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
All right,
You
thanks a
too.
lot.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good day.
Great, so I'm going to just share the last two. We just heard from Christina Hartman, Democratic candidate for PA Auditor General. Interviewed by my students at Central High School. I just want to remind everyone to register to vote. The deadline to register is May 18th. And if you are already registered, please be sure to apply for a mail-in ballot. Because of the COVID-19, a lot of polling places, 77% of Philadelphia polling places are going to be closed on election day. So they're consolidating a lot of polling places together. There's going to probably be long lines, but if people register to vote by mail, we can alleviate those lines and keep everyone safe. So you do that at votespa.com. You can also print out a paper application and send that in as well, and they'll mail you a paper application if you need it. If you want to get involved in voter registration, registering other youth around the city, Philly Youth Vote, Vote That John, please connect with us. And When We All Vote is doing locally and nationally. And once again, we have a house party coming up this Saturday with DJ Jazzy Jeff and other DJs and musicians, DJ Diamond Cuts. We're going to be spinning music and registering voters and reminding them to get their mail-in ballots all night. So from 5 to 8 anyway on Saturday. So please join us. Thank you, everyone, and happy voting.